You! What are you doing at my piano?
I was invited. What's your problem?
You're ruining the whole thing!
The farewell party had already begun to dissolve into the soft clinking of glasses and polite, fading laughter when Daniel quietly stepped toward the stage, a place he had avoided for 10 long years while building his reputation behind conference tables and glass office walls. Nearly 200 people filled the grand hall, partners in tailored suits, assistants who had memorized his coffee order, old friends who remembered him before success reshaped his world. The golden lights above shimmered against crystal chandeliers, casting reflections that trembled like uncertain memories. No one expected anything more than a final handshake and a courteous goodbye. He had resigned that morning without explanation, sending shockwaves through the company he had led from obscurity to global recognition. Speculation hung heavier than perfume in the air. Some whispered of scandal, others of illness, others of secret ambition. But Daniel had offered nothing beyond a calm smile and a simple thank you. As the evening's host reached for the microphone to formally conclude the celebration, Daniel lifted his hand gently, almost apologetically, and asked if he could play one song before leaving. A ripple of confusion spread across the crowd. Many didn't even know he could play. The piano in the corner had been hired purely for atmosphere, touched earlier by a background musician whose melodies no one truly heard. Now it was rolled forward, its polished surface catching the light as Daniel took his seat. He paused there for a long moment, fingers resting on the keys without pressing them, eyes lowered as though listening to something distant and invisible. Slowly, the room settled. Conversations faded mid-sentence. A single, fragile note broke the silence, so soft it forced the audience to lean inward to hear it. Then another followed, and another, forming a melody that felt both unfamiliar and deeply personal. It wasn't a triumphant farewell or a playful tune. It was raw, almost vulnerable, carrying an ache that wrapped itself around every listener. The notes seemed to echo against the high ceilings and return heavier, fuller, as if layered with memories no one else could see. Daniel's posture straightened as the music deepened, his hands moving with quiet certainty, revealing a mastery none of his colleagues had ever witnessed. Faces in the crowd began to change. Smiles faded, brows furrowed. A woman near the front pressed her napkin to her lips, her eyes shining unexpectedly. The melody shifted into a tender passage that resembled a lullaby, delicate and intimate, the kind sung in dimly lit rooms long after the world has gone to sleep. In the third row, an elderly woman suddenly gasped, her hand gripping the armrest beside her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as recognition dawned. The lullaby had belonged to her late husband, a composer whose work had never found fame beyond their modest town decades ago. He had died believing his music would disappear with him. Yet here it was, resurrected with breathtaking precision. Daniel transitioned seamlessly into a swelling orchestral interpretation, his fingers dancing across the keys with a mixture of strength and sorrow, as though stitching together past and present in real time. No one dared whisper. Even the staff stood frozen at the edges of the room. When the final crescendo arrived, it rose like a storm and then softened into a lingering final chord that vibrated through the floorboards and into the chests of every person present. The sound dissolved into silence so profound it felt physical. Daniel lifted his hands slowly from the keys and turned toward the elderly woman, their eyes meeting across the stillness. In that suspended moment, 200 people stood completely frozen, not out of confusion, but because they understood they had just witnessed something far greater than a farewell performance. They had seen a hidden legacy revealed and a man choosing to honor it before walking away from everything he had built. The morning after the farewell felt unreal, as though the previous night had been a shared dream that refused to fade. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the same grand hall, now stripped of its decorations, yet still carrying an invisible echo of the music that had silenced 200 hearts. Word of Daniel's performance had spread far beyond those walls. Someone had recorded the final minutes, and by dawn the video had begun circulating online, drawing thousands of strangers into the moment that had left the room breathless. Yet Daniel stood alone at the piano again, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed not on a camera but on the carefully arranged sheets of music resting before him. The elderly woman from the night before sat quietly in the front row, clutching a small, time-worn photograph of her late husband, her expression suspended between grief and gratitude. One by one, musicians entered the hall, violinists, a cellist, a flutist, and finally a conductor who carried the score with visible reverence. They had agreed to gather on short notice, moved by the story behind the melody. Without speeches or introductions, they took their positions. The air felt charged, expectant, as if history itself were leaning forward to listen. When the conductor raised his baton, a hush fell once more, deeper than before because now everyone understood what the music represented. The first violin began with the delicate lullaby, its tone clear and fragile, and the cello answered with a warm undercurrent that felt like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. Daniel joined softly, his piano weaving through the strings not as a soloist seeking attention, but as a bridge connecting every instrument into one living memory. The composition expanded, revealing movements no one had heard the night before, sections filled with longing, then resilience, then a sudden burst of triumphant light that seemed to lift the very ceiling. As the music swelled, the doors at the back creaked open. Former colleagues slipped inside quietly, followed by staff members, then strangers who had seen the video and felt compelled to witness whatever would happen next. Within minutes, nearly 200 people once again lined the hall, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. No one spoke. No phones were raised this time. They sensed instinctively that this was not a spectacle but a sacred continuation. Midway through the symphony, the orchestra softened until only a single violin carried the melody forward. In that fragile pause, the elderly woman slowly rose from her seat. Her hands trembled, yet her gaze remained steady as she began to hum the lullaby under her breath. The sound was thin but unwavering, blending with the violin so naturally it felt as though it had always belonged there. Daniel looked up, emotion flickering across his face, and gently adjusted his tempo to follow her voice. The conductor lowered his baton, allowing the orchestra to breathe around her, shaping the music to cradle her courage. Tears flowed freely throughout the hall, yet no one moved to wipe them away. The melody built again, now enriched by her living memory, rising into a crescendo that felt less like performance and more like resurrection. When the final chord resonated, it lingered in the air like a promise fulfilled. Silence followed, vast and immovable, as 200 people stood frozen once more. Not in shock this time, but in reverence. They understood they had witnessed not only the revival of a forgotten composer's masterpiece, but the healing of a woman's decades-old grief and the quiet bravery of a man who chose purpose over prestige. Daniel stepped forward, meeting the crowd's gaze with calm certainty, and announced that the symphony would be recorded and shared with the world so that its melody would never again fade into obscurity. Only then did applause erupt, rolling through the hall like thunder after a long-awaited storm, while many remained still a few seconds longer, unwilling to disturb the sacred stillness that had transformed an ordinary farewell into an unforgettable awakening.